I've been to lots of social gatherings of the lawyers here in New York City, and there was a level of terror about what's going to happen with AI.
Welcome to the Evolvepreneur AI Advantage Show. I'm your host, Richard Wray. My mission is to help entrepreneurs understand AI and use it to their advantage. Join me today where we dig deep with our guests and get you the best concepts and strategies. Today's special guest is Jerome-W Dewald. Jerome is a pioneer in AI and programming, with a background in computer science and psychology dating back to the 1970s. He's ventured into diverse fields, from writing bots and leveraging deepfake technology for legal education to founding the GPT-3 Venture Fund and Pro-SE Pro, a tool for unrepresented litigants. Today we're talking about busting the doors on the legal system for unrepresented litigants. Jerome, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard. It's nice to be here.
Really great to have you here, Jerome. And the question I ask all my guests at the beginning, Jerome, where in the world are you?
I'm in New York City, the Big Apple.
One of my favorite cities in the world, a wonderful, wonderful place. So, Jerome, tell me, like so many of my guests, you have this amazing history. I merely scratched the surface. Is there anything else that you'd like to add and tell the listeners about today?
Well, let me just quickly give you the 70,000-foot view.
That'd be great.
Born in Detroit, Michigan. My father was a dentist in dental school at the time, and so we were just temporarily there for dental school. I moved back and grew up in Muskegon, Michigan, which was my parents' hometown. I went to Michigan State University, lived there for beyond graduation. Started a computer consulting business, then a computer hardware business. Then I sold that, and I went to Moscow, Russia for a summer internship in the Russian language at the age of 39, I think, and fell in love with it and just stayed there for 25 years. Came back here at 2014 and decided to live in New York City.
Oh, wow. So you were in Russia what time period?
1990 to 2014. So it was just basically just after the wall came down.
Mm-hmm.
The part that I consider the good part, which is before Putin came along, when there was a real flourishing move toward democracy.
Glasnost and everything that went with that, yeah?
It's just very exciting. And then the old guard took over. It's hard to keep the old guard out.
They're old for a reason.
Yeah. So that kind of deteriorated there. And then by the time 2014 came around, the ruble was crashing. I had some real estate investments. I decided I better get out now while I still had something. Sold it all and came back and decided to live in New York City.
Fantastic. Heck of a journey you've been on there. Let's get into the AI world. So you've done lots of very interesting things. And as I mentioned during the intro, you created Pro-SE Pro, which is an AI tool for unrepresented litigants. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because we're talking today about busting the doors on the legal system for unrepresented litigants.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult to characterize exactly what the target market is. Unrepresented litigants is the easy way to put it. The more confusing way is unrepresented actors, because a litigant is an adversarial process, like being in court in a complaint, a criminal, it could be civil, criminal, divorce, could be a lot of things. But there are also scenarios that are collaborative, like if you are a businessman and you want to have a contract with someone else for some service, that's not adversarial at all. So we aim to serve that entire population, and it doesn't necessarily mean replacing a lawyer. What it really means is making the unrepresented litigant capable and knowledgeable enough that they could represent themselves if they choose to.
That's really interesting, because there's always that phrase of, a man who represents himself is a fool. So it sounds like you're kind of trying to break that misnomer almost, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's it. In context, I think that is probably a nice saying, but I don't think it applies 100% of the time. It depends on your level of intelligence. It depends on how willing you are to really roll up your sleeves and dig in deep. It depends whether you have the time and energy for that. A lot of people are simply too busy involved with their profitable lives to stop and become a lawyer for a while. So it's not suitable for everybody, but there's a rather large class of people for whom it is either suitable because they like it and enjoy it, or it's suitable because they have no other choice and they don't have any money for a lawyer.
And I think that's a very important point to take on board, because you see so many cases where people have been misrepresented in court or they've had bad representation, but you're actually saying that you can actually help people. So even if they are working with a lawyer, for instance, with your tool, they actually have a deeper understanding and more information to hand.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you've really touched on something really critically important, and that is that people often choose bad lawyers. They usually don't do it too many times in a row, because you get burned once and you get shy after that, right? Once bit, twice.
Or you're behind bars, one of the two.
Oh, yes. Or you might be behind bars. But we try to address that problem as well. So we have three components in the system. One is what we call a scenario analyzer, and that is McKinsey and Company did a study in November last year of real estate. I just wrote an article for a real estate magazine about AI in the real estate market, and they characterize it as having four different fundamental strengths. One of those was what they call co-piloting, and co-piloting is like the chatbots that we get on a banking website, or really common kind of bot is, in my opinion, terrible, really dumb. Yeah, they're
not smart.
Yeah, they tell you how much they can do, and then you try it, and they can't do any of that stuff. So what we set up is an interview bot that is, right now we're in beta, but as we develop it further, there will be multiple personas. So we would have three personas in our interview bot. One is the professor of our law school, the other is a litigator persona, and the other is a mediator persona. So we have Max Justice as our litigator, and we have Mia Harmony, who is our mediator, and they do an interview that is composed of open-ended questions like, what is your problem? Expand a little further on what you just said. And some focused questions like, are you the descendant of the plaintiff? What state are you in? Is this federal or state? And those, we put those all together at the end, and we create a structured prompt for what we're using now is the API version of GPT-4, what will soon be GPT-5. And we feed it a structured prompt. And from that, we ask it to give us three different things. We ask it to give us a recommendation of courses for the user to take from our Legalis Law School that would make them knowledgeable about what they're getting into. Like, you don't need to learn bankruptcy if you're in divorce, for example. If you want to get a JD, we'll give you a JD too. That's a whole different way of looking at it. But we give them some scenarios of what they could do. We give them a list of coursework and the prices, which are very cheap for the coursework. And then we direct their problem over to our community forum, which is called Docket Overflow. And if you are a techie type like me, you are certainly familiar with Stack Overflow. So we are moving them to a community platform very much like Stack Overflow. And there we give the question, we give their scenario to lawyers who we've already preloaded into the system. And we send that to the lawyer privately and securely and say, here is a problem. Do you want to help your user on our site with it? Now, the lawyer can say, sure, I want to get involved. Or the lawyer can say, no, I don't want to do this. And that way, the user can meet and develop relations of trust with legal professionals. Now, they might not choose to engage them, or they might. But as we see it, or as I see it, this is a much, much better way to choose lawyers than going out to the internet and doing a search where you find out something like a super lawyer who is rated somehow by some association of other lawyers by each other on very opaque terms. Like, why do you guys, all you other lawyers, think this lawyer is a super lawyer? Because he can generate lots of billings for the firm? Is that what makes him a super lawyer? Then hell me. as a litigant, I want someone who's knowledgeable, who's empathetic, who's not too expensive, and that's not easy to get when you're just searching the internet. So that's
especially if this is, the first time that you've needed a lawyer. How do you know who the good people are?
Oh, absolutely. If you've done this a lot of times, you kind of get into a rhythm. And let's say so there are some people who are very litigious. And, by the time they've done this 2 or 3 or 4 times, they got the routine down there, how to find a good lawyer. But the people that are entering the system the first time, or even if they've been in a casual way, like the example I made about the adversarial versus collaborative roles.
Yes.
If you're in some collaborative need where maybe you're a businessman and you need to make an agreement to buy or sell a product where you would normally hire a lawyer for that, that's not adversarial. That's not litigating. That's cooperating with somebody to come up with a structure. So, those kinds of people typically are going to be challenged when they're looking for a lawyer. Well, it's not so important with collaboration. With litigation, it's very important.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's there's the term litigant, which has connotations if you've not been involved with it. So it's great that this has been broken down in that. But let me make sure I've understood how the system works, because it sounds to me as if there is a huge amount of time saving for both the person using your service, but also for the potential lawyers that may get involved with this. So you ask the user a series of Socratic-style questions. So you go through, you make sure you get a great summary of that generated. That is then shared with potential lawyers, and then there's a connection between that potential lawyer and the litigant to make sure that they work together. And if that works out, all is good. Otherwise, there's other people. So a huge amount of time saving in both generating of information and also the discovery phase for both the user of the service and the potential lawyer. Is that a fair take on it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think one of the important issues from a legal perspective that you always need to keep in mind is when you have a relationship with a lawyer, you've got privilege, what is called privilege, which means if you're a murderer and you have confessed to the murder to your lawyer, you're protected from your lawyer going to court and turning you in.
Yes.
Unless you're in the process of doing a murder. In this case, privilege doesn't count. But when you're on a site like our site, we can't give privilege because we are not lawyers and we are not under contract with you to be your lawyer. So lawyers get a little bit skittish about discussing these things on an open forum like that. So what we usually say is that, that the most important thing is to have disclosure, make sure everybody understands they don't get privilege, and then pull them off site to a private setting where you can discuss things under a privileged, under an umbrella of privilege. So I get that objection sometimes, and while we're at it, you go to the question of who are the potential users of the site. So, and you've identified 2 of them quite well. One is the unrepresented litigant, and the other is lawyers. When I would say solo practices in small firms, I don't think the big firms. The big firms can afford their own AI and get a real leg up on the little guys that way. But there's also another, what we think is a large group of users, and that's the nonprofits that serve unrepresented litigants. There are lots and lots of them. In New York, one of the largest ones is called NY Legal Associates Group, NYLAG. So NYLAG has got, we've got in our database 1,000 NYLAG lawyers, and we categorize them according to what segments they serve. Like they've got, I think, 10, 12 lawyers that serve tenant rights. They've got the next group I think is domestic violence. So they've got them categorized. And then when we categorize docket overflow, we say, what's the nature of your problem? If they choose tenant rights, then that question gets funneled out to those lawyers who have those skills. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's probably a third, even larger segment of users, which are the nonprofits, of which there are hundreds of them, because of the constitutional right to process, which is extended to U.S. citizens and other citizens of different countries around the world.
So this is very interesting because it does sound like you're empowering people and also the organizations, because AI can be used in lots of positive ways, which is what you're doing with it. So tell me, can you give me any examples of cases or people that have used your service that you think they would have really run into problems if they hadn't have used it?
We've only been up for a couple of months, so the cases we've mainly been running alpha test cases, which would be very early cases to test whether the concept itself works right. And those cases are all at the stage of moving into what is usually the first phase of a litigation, which is dismissal. So the first, you bring your complaint to the court, the other side gets notice of it, and the first thing the other side is move to dismiss those complaints by saying you're not.
Just try and stop things as quickly as you can. Exactly. Stop it getting any more expensive for a start.
Right. You don't have a claim, you're in the wrong jurisdiction, or you never served me right, whatever the excuse is. So those alpha cases are just getting to that stage where I think we're getting into our first one in the first part of May. So I really don't have any cases I can cite at this stage. We just have.
No, I completely understand. But it does sound like you're giving people access to a realistic service as opposed to them just thinking they've seen episodes of LA Law and they think they can actually just quote things off of that.
Yeah, it's a whole lot better than trying to do an internet search to do it. But you can do that sort of thing. And before AI, I used to do it using tools like Google Scholar. When you talk about using a large language model like GPT for legal work, one of the big problems that you run into is that language is by its nature creative. You think about it. If you want to say a particular idea, there's 1,000 ways to say it. Shakespeare would say it one way, and James Joyce would say it a different way. They can say the same thing. And large language models are just like that. If you ask it the same exact question with the same prompt, it'll 2 or 3 times or 3 times or 4 times, it'll give you 2 or 3 or 4 different, but the same answers. The words will all be different, but the answers will go usually to about the same end point. So in legal work, what you find out is when you ask it for citations, you say, give me a case that supports what the large language model has just come up with a solution that says you can do this litigation, you can bring up these claims in a court, and then you say, okay, give me a citation for this claim number 1. It's larceny by conversion, for example. It may find some few things in its database, but it will make up the rest. Just make them up.
I'll ask you about this because AI is renowned for having these hallucinations, and even when you look at the bottom of ChatGPT or Gemini from Google or any of the other services, there's always that little legal warning with a link up to something that's a lot more in depth, which warns you, be careful. You could come up with some, we'll try our best, but there could be hallucinations here. So how are you managing that?
But the user can't be so naive as to think. We give them the disclaimers, of course. But at the end of the day, if you're going to take that, and you're not a lawyer, you're going to take that recommendation to take this particular strategy, and then you come up with some citations. You have to check those. The easiest way to do them is just do an internet search on them. Some of them you can spot very easily because the names of the plaintiffs will be Smith versus Jones, and the case number will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How coincidental could that be? It's not coincidental; it's a fate. So,
but of course, you're in a situation there where a lot of people, they could be extremely stressed, and this is the first time they've ever had to deal with the legal world. So, they may not be looking to that same degree that if you're sat back going, okay, well, let's analyze this. So I'm glad that you make sure that, there is that warning in advance and you say to people, hey, you really do need to check this.
Yeah, I was just, I didn't participate in, but I was in the audience of an AI forum with the New York City Bar Association. I was just yesterday. And that was a big issue there too, that, that lawyers are very conservative by nature. And there is a certain, when we say busting the system, there's a certain kind of implied threat. I've been to lots of social gatherings of the lawyers here in New York City, and I can tell you with certainty that there is a level of terror among a large group of lawyers about what's going to happen with AI. But I've been in technology for 50 years, and I remember times with my lawyers back before Microsoft Word, back when we had what was it?
Word Perfect and now
yes, Word exactly. Word.
Yeah, my age now, so.
and I was in a situation with a startup. I had a computer store, and there's a term we use called bleeding edge. That means you're spending money on things that are cutting edge technology, but nobody wants to buy them yet because they don't understand them or they're too expensive. I had a warehouse full of this stuff, and I owed my lawyer money. And I went to my lawyer and I said, could we trade? I'll give you 4 or 5 computers. We'll just trade for this bill. And he looked at me and he said, I don't need those computers. I got enough secretaries to do all the work. And I said, okay. And then after another month, I came back again. I said, look, Bernie, you got to take this stuff. We got to settle this bill. He said, fine, I'll take it. And then I saw him like 6 months later. This was back in the day when being gay was illegal. He said, Jerome, I got this case about the Mason rest stop guys. I could do all this work with the same number of secretaries as one of those cases. I just duplicate the whole thing and change the names. I said, I told you that, Bernie. So it's the same thing with AI. I did the same sort of thing with fax machines. People are throwing out of their offices. You're nuts. What are you talking about? About paper? This paper coming out on the other side of the world through a telephone? Get out of my office.
Who's going to use that?
Yeah, right. So the lawyers should not be afraid of this. I don't think they should look at it this way. All that boring case prep stuff that you got to do, you're not going to have to do it anymore. You're going to be able to focus your time on the hard work. AI is never going to stand in the courtroom and make an argument in front of a judge in your place. It's not.
So I understand that recently there was a case in America where a lawyer did actually use AI to prepare his case, but the judge found out and he was not happy. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, yes. That was discussed in yesterday's seminar. It's a well-known case. It's a lazy lawyer. It might have been somebody right out of law school, somebody with a lot of skills, maybe somebody who was overworked and didn't have time. Mm-hmm. There was another one earlier than that where somebody had a website that was promoting getting out of your speeding tickets using AI, and he was in, as I understand it. Now, don't hold me to this. I'm just taking it out of my memory. But it seems to me this guy was in the court with with earpods in or something, and he was talking to his AI, and the AI was prompting him what to tell the judge about how to get out of a parking ticket, and that service got hauled into court for practicing law without a license.
Wow! I mean, that's like the worst. That's the worst Serrano de Bergerac ever. I mean, that is terrible. Yeah, that's really bad. But you've got that whole process though of getting advice from a person versus getting advice from an AI. So what would be the difference there then if somebody else was talking into that person's ear and there was no AI involved? They were just a really knowledgeable lawyer on the outside. Maybe they couldn't make it physically.
Yeah, I don't know I haven't seen any precedent for that, and I don't know for certain what the court would say, but it seems to me that it would not be a big problem. You have a right to counsel.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an AI is not the one that's acceptable at this time.
It's a kind of a tricky question. I think it kind of goes state by state. Now, I've looked it up here in the state of New York, and New York state laws around practicing law without a license have everything to do with what you do and not what you say. So if you tell people that you're a lawyer, that's not against the law. But if you tell people you're a lawyer and then you take their money to represent them, that's against the law because you're doing something, right?
So let me understand this correctly then. So using your system where people can go on courses and actually then, maybe they do end up in court, but they represent themselves. That's not practicing law without a license. That's representing themselves. But if you're representing somebody else, then that means that you are practicing law without a license. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, that's absolutely correct. And I think that would be true in virtually every state in the United States and probably in most jurisdictions in other countries as well, if they have these kinds of laws. Yes.
That's
good. While you're talking about this whole thing, something I wanted to bring up was Legalis Law School, because we're doing something very interesting over at Legalis. We're structuring an entire law school in a virtual environment. And we think that in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to license it as an accredited law school where you can actually get a JD degree. And we plan to use Sora, which is the new AI tool
The
for
video,
deepfakes,
yeah.
right? Not necessarily Sora. It could be any version, anybody's version of deepfaking. But the idea here is that we would go into contract with professors to teach our courses, and then we would license their images and use a tool like Sora to create all of the lecture content, all of the online interactions, all of the one-on-one counseling sessions, and do that at we're targeting 1/100th of the cost of a Harvard law degree.
That's impressive.
Yeah, we think that could be done in the next 2 or 3 years.
That's amazing. So, Jerome, if there's one piece of advice that people would take away from our conversation today, what would it be?
Being extremely careful when you choose a lawyer. Don't trust what they tell you in the advertisements, and take your time. Find out that they have experience with the cases that the kind of case that you're working with, and get to know them before you sign a contract.
That's great advice, whether it's to do with AI or not. That's just great advice, full stop. Jerome, where can people find you, and where can they find these really great products that you've got?
Well, the ProSay Pro website is at pro-say.pro. Let me spell that for you. It's pro-se.pro. So it's one of the new domains. It's a .pro domain.
Mm-hmm.
And the GPT-3 Venture Fund can be found at gpt3venture.com. So it's a .com site, and it's GPT-3, no hyphens, no spaces, no dots, venturefund.com.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you're doing some amazing things and enabling people to help themselves in ways that they potentially couldn't before, especially with a non-profit. So sounds like you're doing some great stuff, Jerome.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about it with you, Richard. You've been a great host.
Well, that's a wrap on another awesome guest episode for the Evolvepreneur AI Advantage show. Just before you go, if you like this episode, we would be very grateful for a 5-star review. Please also consider recommending the show to a friend or two. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at aiadvantage.show right now. Until next time, I'm Richard Wray, and if you're an entrepreneur, get the AI Advantage today.